Billionaire buys a bride for one night. She vanishes, then returns with twins. Hey, beautiful souls, welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. If you're a fan of emotional love stories, romance that stirs the heart, and characters who find their way back to each other, then you're in the right place. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single story moment. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know where this beautiful community is growing. Drop your country or city in the comments. Damian Blackwood lived a life most men only dreamed of. 30 years old, handsome beyond reason and rich beyond imagination. His blue eyes, the color of the coldest winter sky, held a cruel depth, a chill that seemed to freeze anyone who dared to look too long. His jet black hair was always perfectly styled, and his tailored suits seemed to make the women he encountered fall like moths to a flame. But despite his magnetic presence and his reputation as the ultimate playboy, Damian was nothing like the man people believed him to be. Underneath the layers of wealth, charisma, and charm lay a man who had long buried his ability to love. He viewed love as a weakness, a trap for the naive. To him, women were a daily indulgence, nothing more than a brief escape from the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. Every night was a new adventure, a new conquest, yet each morning he woke up feeling just as hollow as the day before. But that all changed the night he met her. Zara Monroe was a vision that struck him like a thunderbolt. She wasn't like the others. She was different. She radiated confidence and beauty that couldn't be bought. Her skin glowed like the night sky, dark and rich, and her eyes, deep and soulful, held a story untold. A story that seemed to reach inside him and stir something he hadn't felt in years. Her curves were mesmerizing, every movement deliberate, graceful yet full of passion. She wore red lipstick that made her lips look like they'd been painted by the gods themselves, and the black eyeliner around her eyes gave her a gaze that could cut through steel. It was at a private charity gala, a place where people like Damian thrived, where he first saw her, standing out in the crowd, almost as if she were out of place. But to Damian, she was the only one who mattered. Without hesitation, he approached her, his voice low and commanding. "One night," he said, offering a deal no woman could refuse, an unimaginable sum for a single night of her time. No questions asked, no strings attached. Zara, caught between the crushing weight of her 6 sisters' medical bills and the allure of the stranger's offer, felt her resolve falter. She wasn't the type to take handouts, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She hesitated, her pride clashing with the reality of her situation. But the thought of saving her sister pushed her past her doubts. In the end, she agreed, not fully understanding the power of the choice she had just made, nor the storm it would unleash in both their lives. That night, as the world outside carried on, they would cross paths in a way neither of them could have predicted. For Damian, it was another conquest. For Zara, it was a night that would change everything, even if she didn't know it yet. Zara stepped into Damian's penthouse with the grace of a goddess, the black dress she wore flowing around her like smoke in the dim light, her every movement purposeful, controlled and yet somehow wild, as if she held an untold story beneath her skin. Damian watched, his eyes following her with an intensity he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something deeper than desire. She was not like the others, not like the string of women he had invited into his life, each one fading into the shadows of his memory the moment the dawn arrived. Zara was different. Her presence was like a fire burning brightly, but it was a fire that could ignite and consume him in ways he didn't understand. The chemistry between them was palpable, an invisible force that seemed to crackle in the air around them. He knew it the moment she locked eyes with him, a powerful gaze, full of strength and yet something softer, something vulnerable. This was more than just a transaction. It was a meeting of souls. Their night began with words soft and teasing, their laughter filling the space between them. But soon, the playful banter shifted into something more intense. As he pulled her closer, their bodies speaking the language their mouths couldn't quite manage, something shifted inside him. He expected passion, lust. He had lived on those his entire life. What he didn't expect was the way her touch seemed to unravel him, the way her lips lingered on his, not just seeking pleasure, but something deeper, something raw. When their bodies finally collided, it wasn't the wild, unrestrained lust he was accustomed to. It was slow, tender, almost reverent. She didn't just give herself to him. She gave him a part of her soul, a piece of her heart, a secret buried beneath years of pain and strength. Her every touch made him feel things he thought he had long buried, things he wasn't sure he wanted to feel. The night stretched on, timeless and unforgettable. She challenged him without saying a word, asking him to look beyond the walls he'd built around himself, asking him to feel something he had long since shut off. For the first time, Damien Blackwood wasn't just a man taking what he wanted. He was a man who felt something that left him vulnerable, something that could ruin him. But as the night ebbed away, as the warmth of her body slowly left his sheets, Damien woke to an emptiness that had nothing to do with his physical surroundings. The bed beside him was cold, the space where she had lain now just an impression in the sheets. He reached for her, his fingers brushing against nothing but air. She was gone. The silence of the penthouse pressed in around him as he lay there, his chest heavy with an unfamiliar feeling. She had vanished, like smoke disappearing into the night, leaving nothing but a lingering scent of perfume in the air and a soft, red lipstick kiss on the pillow, where her head had rested. For a moment he just stared at it. The mark she had left behind, a symbol of something he couldn't quite place, something that felt like an open wound. The night had meant something to her too, he realized, but what? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something that wasn't his to keep, that what had transpired between them had been more than he had bargained for. She wasn't just another fleeting affair. She had come into his life, touched him, and left him with nothing but memories of a night that had changed the game forever. The days that followed her disappearance were filled with an unbearable silence that gnawed at Damien. No matter how many women he brought into his life, no matter how many fleeting encounters he had, none of them felt real. It was as though the moment Zara had walked out of his life, she had taken a part of him with her. The nights grew longer, colder, and the emptiness that had once been filled by empty pleasures began to feel suffocating. Her face, her touch, the sound of her laughter, all of it lingered in his mind, like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. He tried to move on, to forget, but Zara became his obsession, the one woman who had escaped his grasp. Her memory haunted him in every corner of his world, in every whisper of the wind. In every quiet moment, he found himself alone with his thoughts. He couldn't erase the feeling that something had been left unfinished between them, something that no other woman could even begin to fill. Damien's search for her became an obsession in itself. He had no last name to go on, no friends, no contacts, nothing but the haunting image of her in his mind. He scoured every inch of the city, asking around at the places she had been, tracking down any clue that might lead him to her. But it was as though she had disappeared into thin air. The more he searched, the more elusive she became. And the more elusive she was, the more he couldn't let go. He would wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest as if he were on the brink of finding her, only to be met with the harsh reality of her absence. His mind refused to let her go, and with each passing day, The pain of that night's end only grew sharper. Meanwhile, Zara had returned to a life that felt worlds apart from the high society Damien inhabited. She had retreated into quiet solitude, her days now filled with the overwhelming responsibility of raising the two beautiful boys, who were the living proof of the most unforgettable night of her life. Zion and Zayn, twins with their father's ocean blue eyes, mischievous and bright, full of life and energy that made every day a whirlwind of joy and exhaustion. Zara had done her best to give them a life filled with love and protection, away from the chaos of their father's world. She had never planned for this. She hadn't expected to fall pregnant with twins, and she certainly hadn't anticipated how deeply she would bond with them, how quickly they would become her entire world. Yet even as she loved them fiercely, there was a part of her that could never let go of the man who had given them life. She had tried to move on, tried to bury the memories of their night together, but the truth was, she couldn't. Not when every time she looked into their eyes, she saw Damien in them, saw him in the way Zion's smile could light up a room, or the way Zayn's mischievous grin mirrored his father's. Zara had made a vow to herself the moment she found out she was pregnant. She would raise her sons alone if she had to, but she would never let them be a part of Damien's world. She would protect them from the chaos, the hurt, and the truth that had the potential to shatter everything. It wasn't just about keeping them safe from the pressures of his world. It was about keeping them safe from the possibility that their father, the man who had once burned so brightly in her life, might not be ready to love them or her. She had no idea where he was or what he was doing, but she was certain of one thing. The man she had shared that night with was not the man who would be able to offer them the stability they deserved. So she buried the truth, she kept them hidden, and she did everything in her power to protect her sons from the reality of their father's existence. But even in the quiet moments, as she watched Zion and Zayn grow, there was always the lingering question of what would happen if Damien ever found out. What would he do? Would he want them? Would he want her? The questions swirled in her mind, but she couldn't afford to entertain them. She had made a life for herself and her children, and that was all that mattered. At least that was what she told herself. The memory of that night haunted Damien in a way nothing had ever done before. He couldn't shake the way Zara had entered his penthouse like she was stepping out of a dream, her presence effortlessly commanding every corner of the room, her aura rich with both mystery and warmth. As the door closed behind her, the tension between them crackled in the air, electric, undeniable. He had never felt the stirrings of desire so intensely. She wasn't like the women he had encountered before. Zara didn't walk into his world to be just another conquest. She was a force, a mystery he needed to understand. But at the same time, he felt no desire to analyze. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. He offered her a drink, and their conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, their words not just passing time, but connecting them in a way Damien hadn't experienced before. They spoke about everything and nothing, her quiet strength, his scars, the invisible barriers they both wore. She laughed, and her laughter was like music, soft and light, but also rich and full, stirring something deep inside of him that had been dormant for years. The weight of his own thoughts, the emptiness that had plagued him, suddenly lifted in her presence. As the night deepened, the air between them grew heavier, more intimate. Damien led her to the dance floor, the dim light casting shadows over them, their movements slow and deliberate. The music, soft and seductive, matched the rhythm of their bodies. Zara's hand rested on his shoulder, and her body pressed against his, warm and intoxicating. Every moment felt like an eternity, and every touch sent a spark through him. Her fingers traced the outline of his jaw, lingering for just a moment too long, before pulling him closer with a tenderness that took him by surprise. There was no rush, no frantic urgency, just the soft, quiet exploration of two souls who had crossed paths at the right time. He undid the buttons of her dress slowly, reverently, as though she were the most fragile thing he had ever touched, as if her very being was something sacred, something worth cherishing. Zara's fingers ran through his hair, sending a shiver down his spine, and when she whispered his name, it was as if the sound of it on her lips unraveled the last of his defenses. Her breath was warm against his skin, and when their lips finally met, it wasn't a collision. It was an awakening. Their kiss was a blend of fire and tenderness, an unspoken promise, and an invitation to let go of everything that had come before. Damien had never experienced anything like it, the way their bodies moved together, perfectly in sync, as if they had known each other forever. She was both a wild storm and a gentle breeze, making him feel everything at once. As their bodies intertwined, time lost its meaning, and they became two souls wrapped up in each other, lost in the heat of the moment. When the night finally wound down and the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Damien found himself lying beside her, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Zara had curled herself into him, her head resting on his chest, her breathing steady and soft. For the first time in his life, Damien didn't want to leave. He had always been the one to control the situation, to be the one to walk away when the night was over. But with Zara, it was different. He didn't want the night to end. He didn't want to wake up to an empty bed or to the loneliness he had come to accept as a permanent part of his life. In that quiet, still moment, with her in his arms, he realized something he wasn't ready to face. Zara had become the first woman he never wanted to let go of, the first woman who had managed to break through the walls he had so carefully built around his heart. And as he drifted into an uneasy sleep, he wondered if this was the beginning of something he couldn't control, something that could change everything. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable night, and Damien had become someone unrecognizable, even to himself. The man who once dominated the city's nightlife, who had every desire at his fingertips, now walked with a different air about him. Still rich, still powerful, but quieter, colder, as though the spark that once ignited his every move had been extinguished. The years hadn't been kind to his heart. He had buried himself in work, in fleeting distractions, but the emptiness from that night with Zara lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. She had become a ghost in his mind, her laughter, her touch, the fire in her eyes, all had faded into a distant memory, something he couldn't grasp, yet couldn't forget. He had convinced himself that she was just another fleeting chapter in his life, but deep down, something had always felt incomplete. And then, fate had a cruel way of reminding him why. It was at a charity event for children, one of those upscale gatherings where Damien typically played the role of a philanthropist, dishing out checks and shaking hands. But when his eyes landed on a familiar face in the crowd, Zara, time seemed to slow. The sight of her standing there, organizing the event with the grace and poise that had once captivated him, sent a shockwave through him. Her beauty hadn't changed, if anything, it had only deepened with time. But what struck him the most was the 2 little boys beside her. 2 boys with mischievous grins and eyes the exact shade of ocean blue that had once belonged to him. A suffocating rage filled his chest, followed by confusion and an overwhelming sense of wonder. His heart pounded in his ears as he tried to process the sight before him. These boys? His boys? The world seemed to narrow as he made his way toward her, his steps quick, determined. When he reached her, he didn't give her the chance to speak before he demanded answers, his voice low and edged with anger. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know?" His words came out in a rush, tinged with disbelief and something darker. Zara looked at him, her eyes wide, her face a mix of shock and guilt, but she didn't back away. "Damien, I tried to contact you. I really did. But you vanished. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid," she said, her voice shaky but full of emotion. His jaw tightened. "Afraid of what?" he spat. "Afraid to tell me the truth? Afraid of what I'd do?" His anger surged, and for a moment he wasn't sure who he was more angry at, her for hiding the truth, or himself for letting it slip away. But as her words sank in, as her vulnerability pierced through his rage, a part of him softened. She had tried. She had tried to reach out. But somewhere along the way, they had both slipped into silence. And then everything shifted. The twins, his sons, began to laugh, their joy filling the space between them. They ran toward Zara, their little hands reaching up to her as they called out, "Mommy! Mommy!" The word struck Damien like a slap to the face. "Mommy!" they repeated, their voices filled with adoration. He watched, frozen, as Zara knelt to their level, pulling them into a warm embrace. His sons, his blood, the same mischievous grins, the same eyes that had once stared back at him in the mirror. And as he stood there, staring at them, something inside him cracked, shattered. All the rage, all the confusion, dissolved in that single moment. The sight of them laughing, playing, calling her mommy felt like a punch to his chest. But at the same time, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They were his. They were a part of him, yet they had been hidden from him from the very beginning. Damien felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, and for the first time in years, his emotions felt like they were tumbling out of control. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand why. But as he looked at them, his sons, he knew that nothing could take away the truth that was standing before him. They were his. And Zara had kept them from him, but now everything had changed. The storm of emotions inside him was too much to contain, and the realization that he had missed so much, missed their lives, began to sink in. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Zara had given him something he could never have imagined, the chance to be a father, to be a family. But could he forgive her? Could he even forgive himself for not knowing? That question lingered in the air as the twins continued to laugh, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Damien threw himself into trying to connect with his sons, Zion and Zayn. Every time he saw their faces, with his eyes reflecting back at him, a pang of guilt surged through him. The realization that he had missed so much of their lives was unbearable. He spoiled them with toys, took them to the park, played endless games, and tried to form a bond that had been stolen from him by time. He smiled at their laughter, their innocent joy, but the connection still felt fragile, like a thread too delicate to hold them together completely. The boys responded well. There was no resentment in their eyes, only curiosity, and a child's natural need for affection. They loved him in their own way, and he cherished every moment, every laugh, every hug. But no matter how much he did for them, it was Zara who haunted his thoughts, who filled the empty spaces in his mind. The woman who had once captivated him had become more distant with each passing day. She was polite but guarded, keeping her distance emotionally. There were moments when he thought she might let him in, moments when her eyes softened as she watched him with the boys. But just as quickly that wall would rise again. It frustrated him, ignited a fire of anger and confusion that seemed to be feeding on itself. He was furious with her, furious for keeping this secret, for keeping him from his children. But at the same time, there was something else there, something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. He was drawn to her more than ever before. The same fire that had burned between them that night. The same electricity was still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to explode. One evening, the tension reached its breaking point. Zara was quiet as usual, distant in a way that made him ache with frustration. He had tried to be patient, to understand her. But tonight, he couldn't hold back anymore. "Why do you keep pushing me away?" he snapped, his voice rough with emotion. She flinched at the anger in his tone. But instead of retreating, she turned to face him, her own eyes flashing with hurt. "You don't get it, Damien," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to take the babies from you. I never wanted to keep them from you." Her words, filled with so much pain, caused his heart to stutter. He hadn't expected this. He wanted to shout, to demand answers. But something in her voice, something in the way she looked at him, stopped him. I didn't believe someone like you could love them. Or me. You're a billionaire, Damien. Your world is so far from ours, so out of reach. I thought it would destroy them if you ever found out about them. I thought it would hurt them, hurt you, hurt me." Her confession hit him harder than anything else she had said. The weight of her fear, the depth of her insecurities, laid bare in front of him. He felt something shift inside himself. His anger began to dissolve, replaced by a tenderness he hadn't known was possible. He took a step toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Zara," he said softly, his voice raw with emotion, "I never stopped thinking about you. Not for one moment. I tried, but I couldn't. You're in my thoughts, in my soul. I never stopped wanting you. I never stopped wondering what could have been. I should have looked harder. I should have tried harder to find you, to be there for you and our boys." The weight of his words seemed to hang in the air between them, thick with truth and regret. Zara's eyes welled with tears, and for a long moment they stood there, in the quiet of the room, both of them unsure of what would come next. Then, without warning, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her breath hitched as she reached up, her fingers brushing against his jaw, the touch tentative yet full of longing. Damien's heart raced as he lowered his face, meeting her halfway. The kiss that followed was nothing like the first. It was slower, deeper, filled with a raw need neither of them had ever fully allowed themselves to feel. This kiss wasn't just about passion. It was about regret, about the time they had lost, about the dreams they'd held back. It was about hope for what could still be, for the love that might still be buried beneath all the years of pain. Damien's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, while Zara's arms wrapped around his neck, her body melting into his. The kiss deepened, and in that moment, everything else faded away. The anger, the confusion, the distance. There was only them, only the possibility of a future they hadn't dared to imagine before. When they finally pulled away, breathless and shaking, Damien looked at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness he hadn't known he was capable of. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. The storm between them hadn't passed, but maybe, just maybe, it was the calm before the beginning of something new. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains as Damien stood at the edge of the garden terrace, the weight of a velvet box in his pocket, and the echo of Zara's kiss still lingering on his lips. The night before had broken every barrier between them, and today he stood with no mask, no pretense, just a man stripped of arrogance, vulnerable and certain. When Zara stepped into the garden with Zion and Zane tugging at her hands, dressed in tiny suits and bubbling with laughter, Damien's breath caught. She looked radiant. More than beautiful, she was everything he had once thought he'd never deserve. With a trembling voice but steady eyes, he dropped to one knee, not as the billionaire the world revered, but as a man begging for the chance to belong to something real. "I'm not proposing because I feel I should," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm doing this because I love you truly, wholly. You gave me 2 miracles. You gave me a second chance. And if you say yes, I'll spend every day earning what you and our sons gave me." Zara's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled freely, and through the blur she nodded, whispering yes, with a choked sob that turned into laughter when the boys jumped up and hugged them both. Months later, beneath a canopy of white roses, with only a handful of loved ones present and their sons, grinning proudly as ring-bearers, they were married. Damien's vows were simple but powerful, each word etched with the raw truth of a man transformed. You vanished once, but never again. I'll chase your shadow into every corner of this world, if I have to. You and our boys, you're my world now. And as he slipped the ring on her finger, Zara knew the cold man she had once feared was gone. In his place stood a partner, a father, a lover reborn not through wealth but through love. Their kiss sealed a promise written not in diamonds, but in sacrifice, second chances, and the kind of love that only comes when two broken souls choose to heal together. Damien had once bought a bride for one night, but that night had given him something priceless forever.